just because somebody else says that this is not something worth publishing, like, doesn't mean it isn't, nor should you wait for someone to give you permission or tell you that your story is good enough. If you have a message, if you have an idea, a philosophy, a framework that you think will benefit people, like, make that zine, just like you said, you know.
In this installment of the Redbird Camp Collective audio journal, we talked to Chris Vega, who is an independent publisher and poet. In our conversation, we talk about the importance of small independent press in an age of increasing censorship, the value of risk-taking and building community and maintaining accountability to that community, the power of having a DIY ethic and not waiting for permission, as well as getting into a little bit about what it's like to parent in the face of settler hegemony.
My mother is Anita Vega and my grandmother is Aurora Vega, and my Vega family is based out of El Paso, Texas. That's where I grew up. And now I'm here in Tacoma with my little family, my daughter, 4 years old, Catalina, and she is Hohayat First Nation and Mexicana, and trying to do my part to fight in the ways that I can fight against racism and like a hyper capitalistic society that I also still have to live in, you know, and put food on the table. But really I'm trying to make things at Blue Cactus Press where people can just sort of like liberate themselves from these old storylines that we so often carry with us because we've inherited them or because we've been socialized with them. Or we've had experiences. So I am just trying to kind of increase representation and diversity in publishing and fight the good fight against, there's a lot of stuff out in the world that I think are counter to critical thinking and living your life freely and setting your life up the way you want to. So it's a really long way to say I'm just up here making books.
Amazing books. I think that's a great lead-in to our first question. The horrifying rise of censorship is incredibly troubling. So can you share how Blue Cactus Press is helping preserve minority voices and fight against censorship? And why does the world need more small independent presses right now?
Yeah. So I think I'll start by saying that, like, when we're talking about the number of book bans and censorship rising, it's not just like rising by like 5% or 10%. We're talking about book bans being like under 1,000 per year and then jumping up to 2020, going into the thousands. And in 2023, it was over 10,000 bans in the United States. And so like it is rising at an alarming rate. And I think when I think about like what Blue Cactus Press is doing to preserve representation, I actually wouldn't use the word preserve because representation in literature for Black, Indigenous, and people of color and folks from historically marginalized groups has always been incredibly low. I think in 2023, the official stat was 86% of books made in the United States that are published are written by cis heterosexual white men. And so like we've never, in terms of mainstream publication, traditional publications, in the books you're going to find at, large chain bookstores or in the airport or a lot of even indie bookstores, you're going to find mostly books written by white men unless the booksellers are kind of in the fight with you. And I think a lot of independent bookstores function in community like libraries do and like indie presses do, in that, they're trying to curate a lineup that kind of widens the breadth of that. And so here at the press, I'm trying to flip those stats. I'm always trying to increase the amount of work that we're doing, not just in authorship, I'm trying to, which I do want to represent folks from historically marginalized groups in our authorship, but I think it's also not just our authorship, but the collaborators that we're working with. We're trying to increase representation among the designers we're working with, the editors we're working with the printers that we're working with. I'm always looking for ways to just like do business better, because I love business, don't get me wrong, but I don't like the degree to which we are told we have to participate in the capitalist market. So if I can divest, I also try to find ways where we could do barters and trades, or find ways to kind of move away from a cash market, which it's just a super tricky balance. But I'm trying to flip that script and just increase representation, and also just stick myself in places where I'm going to hear news stories or see news stories, and then bring that back to our community so we can spread it,
Do you know anything about the history of small independent presses, and what they've been able to achieve?
I don't know a lot of like formal history about independent publishing. I'm realizing that could be an area where I have a lot to grow in. And I will say that from my own experience, what I see is that a lot of independent publishers are kind of doing what I was talking about. I feel like they are, out there making a lot of bilingual books. Empty Bowl Press, they're up on the peninsula. They make a lot of Chinese English books. They bring a lot of old literature back into circulation. There's a lot of folks who, I think in the small press world, who are killing genre, making books that you can't say is one thing or another, and are sort of forcing you to live in what a lot of folks would feel like is an uncomfortable middle space that, if you're a person of color from a historically marginalized groups, you're often living in that space, or you have a lot of experience stepping into Nepantla, which is this idea of like inhabiting two worlds at once, two realities at once. And Entre Rios Books up in Seattle, they do a lot of translations as well. They're publishing a lot of Argentinian literature, a lot of Latin American literature that we usually wouldn't find up this way. And I think graphic designers have like a really important role in small press as well. But I think right now what I'm seeing is small press is sort of keeping the funnel open, or the doors wide open on like what we think about as like valid for publication. I think they push back against this idea that you have to fit a certain mold, or your work has to be done a certain way. And I think they're publishing a lot of really cool stuff that people are thinking about right now. Whereas I think like the traditional publishing machines are publishing a lot of work that is frankly outdated, or sort of like not current in terms of representing the communities we live in or the things we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You just had me really thinking about how crucial sort of controlling the means of getting your message out and sort of being able to produce and distribute your own literature has been for just about any sort of social movement, whether you're talking about, looking back at the first half of the 1900s and like the labor movement, and, they're putting out their own publications. Or, I'm even thinking of like, when I was young, like really into like the punk scene, and how so like, zines were to just get, these sort of like folks that didn't have representation or a voice in the mainstream, and how just sort of taking control of your own means of getting your message out, saying what you want to say, producing what you want to produce. And, there was the same thing with like the American Indian movement and, the Black Panthers. And so really just seeing like how crucial that is. And it's cool to, be able to be in relationship with you and get to know you, and really seeing sort of the work you're doing as just a continuation of that legacy of really seeing the power and the impact of just being able to put out, the voices that aren't being, elevated or just not, not supported within the mainstream. I don't know. Well, and I see a lot of power in that too. It's not just sort of like, here we create this little bubble where we have representation, but really being able to do things on your own terms. As I hear you talking about, looking at it holistically, trying to involve designers that come from more diverse backgrounds, trying to disengage and unplug it where you can, when it's possible, from sort of just, the cash economy, capitalist sort of modes of economy. And
Yeah, well, that got me thinking. One of the things you said, I think is really important to point out. You were talking about like taking the power back into our own hands to make what we want, to talk about what we want. And I think that is really important because I think in a lot of cultures, when it comes to like engaging with state entities or how we're socialized or how the education system kind of like pushes us to engage with our worlds, there's, I think, a sense of like learned helplessness that we are pushed into. And I think it's really important. I always tell people, I'm like, look, just because somebody else says that this is not something worth publishing, like, doesn't mean it isn't, nor should you wait for someone to give you permission or tell you that your story is good enough. Like, if you have a message, if you have an idea, a philosophy, a framework that you think will benefit people, like, make that zine, just like you said, and I think it's really important too to also like remember that. And I love book selling, I love publishing. Our office is located on UW campus, and I think it's very dangerous to sort of allow this idea that like intellectual freedom or intellectual value is only found in those spaces. I'm having really important conversations with people like out on the trail when I'm walking around or when I'm at cultural events or, just walking around town or when I'm in community. And I think it's really important that indie presses and people who are just makers, people who are making whatever it is, art, jewelry, books, zines, that we're having these intellectual conversations elsewhere and not just relying on like the traditional book scene or the literary scene as the place where we're going to go like hear new ideas, like, because that's not how we're moving through the world. And so I like engaging with content where in places where I wouldn't think to find it before, and just encouraging people like think about all of this stuff, like take me where you're thinking about it,
Yeah, I think that really resonates with sort of the origin story of Redbird Camp Collective too, of just that central notion of we don't have to wait for institutions to necessarily catch up with us, sort of endorse or sponsor what we're trying to do. The collective really grew out of, I think Lee and I in particular, our frustration with working in, we won't name the institution, but the institution that we were in, and just feeling like the conversations and where we wanted to take them were always sort of caged in within sort of like the framework and the sort of scripts of that institution. And we were out on the Spokane Reservation. At least this for me was an aha moment of being out working in the food sovereignty garden and just realizing that the conversations that we have, just being physically in a different space and being outside of an institution, just felt different, and they went in different directions. And like, how do we just do this on the regular? How do we cultivate this in an intentional way? And what it really was just that idea of like realizing like, oh, we can just do cool shit, like we can just do it, and we can sort of be scrappy and scrounge and figure out how we get the resources and build the partnerships. But like, we don't always need the institution to be the channel that we make these things happen. Sort of take up that DIY spirit of just doing it.
Yeah, and I don't know your own story, Jeremy, but I know for me that like coming to that kind of realization, I think was a part of like growing up really poor in a rural place. and where you have to like come up with creative solutions. You can't wait around for like the state or the large institutions or the school to give you money, because it's not coming. Help isn't coming. And so I think that is like one of those superpowers that we often kind of talk about as like something as a detriment, growing up poor or growing up somewhere where there aren't a lot of resources. But in reality, I think it like kind of freed me and can free a lot of people at a much earlier age from that learned helplessness, or that idea that like waiting for permission. Maybe it's not learned helplessness, but it's like, waiting for permission.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for me, I think some of the experiences that have informed that lens, definitely dealing with some of the things that you just talked about. I think it's also, working in Native education, and maybe I'd be interested to see kind of what Leah thinks about this. I think one, just working in Native education gives you a little bit of that lens too, just because if you talk to anyone, just about anyone working in Native education, you're always overworked and underfunded. Always trying to figure out ways that how do you make things happen. And I think for me too, coming from like an independent music background as well, it sort of informs that of like, been doing DIY shows for the last, well, I don't even want to do the math on it, 20 plus years. And so I think that sort of imbues some of that spirit for sure. And a lot of that has definitely been transferred to Redbird Camp Collective. I did want to get to the second question, which is, when we were in your space a few months back and getting to talk to people and, some of the folks that had been to a few of your different events, and just hearing like really wonderful things about you and the work that you're doing in that space, we really wanted to kind of drill down into how you've approached building community within and through Blue Cactus Press, and whether or not you've seen any sort of changes in the broader community since you've begun doing your projects.
Yeah, I think when I think about how I don't think it was just me. I think I was fortunate in that I was able to kind of build. I started the press. I'll start here. I started the press because I didn't want to go through the traditional model of publishing. I did not want to send my work out to like hundreds of presses just for them to tell me no, try again, try harder, do this, do that. Especially after, I got professional editing. I was willing to create a market ready book, something that I could put in a bookstore that booksellers would want. And I think really quickly I realized that Tacoma was a place where a lot of people kind of just needed that nudge to do that themselves. And so I think there was a lot of community built up in and around this idea of like giving yourself permission to do it yourself. And I think people were really excited to not only like watch the press grow, but participate in that growth with me, because, if I could do it like as a mixed Mexican, at the time I was female presenting person, broke, I had just gotten out of the military, changing careers, and like if I could do it, if I was willing to give it a shot, I think that gave a lot of people a spark of hope that they could do it too. And so I felt like what I saw happening around me was a lot of people rallying to this idea that like, yes, we are enough. Our decisions about our work are enough, and we have the capacity to build beautiful things that we value without validation from the traditional publishing sphere. And I think there were also, Tacoma is filled with artists. And so I think there were a lot of artists that were very excited and willing to sort of jump on board and collaborate with me. And so I think that is how we built up a lot of community at the start. And I think that as my own relationship to my identity changed and the work that I sought out was changing, and as my network grew, I was able to kind of sort of clarify slowly over time, for myself and for other people, what I was trying to accomplish. And so I think that even though I was sort of like clarifying for myself and others, I actually think that clarity of what we were doing was one of the biggest things that has helped us over time expand our audience. And, it's also, I think, holding myself accountable to collaborators has also been another way that I feel like I am seeing community build on the backside of the publishing house. And so we've ended up with a really lovely group of folks that have a lot of trust, just I think in terms of accountability, about being transparent about how the money is moving and where it's coming from and when you're going to get it and what the amount is, and not missing deadlines around those sorts of things, and honoring people's work, not trying to tear it up, or accepting it when somebody says this work is done, this work is complete, or mutually pushing each other to think more critically about our work. Being able to sit down with somebody and very honestly be like, I love this and I think it needs development, or I think we need to be thinking about it from this lens. And so I think it's kind of funny because there's a lot of community around Blue Cactus Press, and I'm so thankful. And some of it is a big chunk of it is from, like the book selling and publishing and the writing world. And then a big chunk of it is behind the scenes. It's how we make the books. It's the designers and the collaborators, the editors, the project managers. And then there's also folks who have found us, like-minded folks about social equity. That's very important to me. And so I think there's a lot of different communities that sometimes we step into and we are welcomed, and sometimes we are building, but it's, I feel like it's less one. I've seen over time a large broadening of the communities that we're in. And I know, in the business world, they tell you like, do one thing really well. And I think there's a lot of value to that, but that's just not how I move through the world. And so not allowing myself to try to step into communities respectfully where I don't know anybody and I don't know how people talk to each other and I don't know what commerce looks like there and I don't know how ideas spread, and just actually listening, actually trying to listen and engage with people where they're at has been one of the biggest tools, I think, in my tool belt for trying to build and engage with communities.
That is so opposite of what I thinking of very specifically that Blue Cactus is on UW Tacoma's campus and in one of the buildings there. I feel like that is so opposite to a student's experience while they are on an academic higher ed campus.
Yes.
Yeah, where it's almost it's
top down,
sterile, performative, not building genuine relationships. Jeremy and I have known a few Native academics, and just the amount of hoop jumping that they have to go through, not only as a Native person, but just as a professor. It's so, it's sterile in a way of they're not legitimate relationships, I feel like. Jeremy and I have left our positions at the higher institution that we were working at, and we had all of these people there that said that they super enjoyed us, and we were all really good friends with them, and suddenly they're not talking to us or taking our calls anymore. And it's so hierarchical, competitive, which is not the way that we act in, community. And so to kind of also add to the earlier question about, often people like to think of college campuses as being kind of these centers of free speech and exchanging of ideas, and yet we're seeing higher education institutions being really places of censorship, especially with current events around Palestine and the way that students are routinely being criminalized and disciplined for speaking out against genocide. And so thinking of, this myth that people like to say of like, I'm thinking of, I'm in Spokane, Washington, so we're very boomer, very red, but thinking of this myth of where people are like, we need to shut down the college campuses because they're too liberal. And it's like, that's kind of the joke's on you, guy. It's actually reinforcing everything that you believe in. So I really appreciate that. And we're going to go off script a little bit, but can you share with us your best, most fond memory of building community at Blue Cactus, and what really warms your heart and your best story about it?
Okay, let's see. Two instances come to mind. I don't know if they're best, but they bring me joy thinking about it. One of them brings me joy, and one of them was just a really good experience. A shorter answer is one of my friends sent me the information for a pop-up market for a skate shop / coffee shop in Tacoma that was going to have like a back alley market, and they built a skate ramp out of the back of somebody's truck, and they were like, hey, we're accepting vendors. And so I applied, and I was like, I don't know anybody here. And as somebody who is two-spirit and my appearance is gender nonconforming, I was really hesitant. I was like, okay, I'm gonna step into this like really masculine space with a bunch of people that I don't know in a back alley on a Sunday, but I'm gonna give it a go. Like somebody I trusted sent it to me, who was another person of color and who also sometimes presents as gender nonconforming. So I was like, okay, they wouldn't have sent me this out of nowhere. So I end up going to this event, and I was pretty on guard because I just didn't know anybody, but I wanted to just get a sense for like what people in the skate world, what people in the punk scene, what people in this part of town were thinking about and talking about, and what they wanted books for, where they go to like share ideas with each other. So I went, and they ended up being super nice, and so everybody was very kind to me. I learned a lot about just that particular community and like the particular challenges that they were facing as like an artistic and sort of like DIY community. And it was great. It was also just like so masculine. And I think that was the scariest thing for me. As a female body growing up on the border, like I've been taught my whole life to stay out of masculine spaces because men will take what they want from me, to be frank. And so that event really pushed back against a lot of the biases and the storylines that I think that I had been holding on to since my childhood. And, I think that helped me like really see just like inherited trauma storylines that I had taken on through a need for survival. And I'm bringing this up. I know we're talking about community, but I'm bringing it up as my personal experience because I think that's how we build community. I think it has to be at that like individual level. And so that was a really formative experience for me. That was this fall or the summer, I think. But it was just really good to be reminded that, like, I do not have to walk in fear. Or even if I hold that fear, it's not good to let that fear drive my actions. And ultimately, that is something that I want folks to feel in communities when they step into spaces that we curate or markets we go to, or, you know, if it's my family or if it's my kid, I want to build community with people who are willing to hold their fear and just consider what the other side of the equation, what those other groups, you know, what's on the other side, I guess. I want to be able to consider what is on the other side of that fear. And so that was a really great experience. And there was a lot of community building, and I really appreciated that event. My friend wasn't even able to show up, so I was just like floating. So it was just great for that reason. It was a really good reminder to not let my fear of stepping into new spaces with new people be in charge, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that story. I love it. And that reminds me of a story from Redbird when we went up to pick huckleberries. And for folks that don't know, huckleberries grow way up in the mountains. And Jeremy had just bought a brand new truck. And I go, "Are you sure you want to take it up on these roads? And they're pretty rutted. Like we'll be okay, but are you sure you want to take your truck up there?" And so we had, you know, five native people jammed into this brand new white truck going up into the mountains to pick huckleberries, and it was a little bit nerve-wracking for me because I was like, oh man, I haven't drove on these roads since a month or two ago, so I don't know how bad it's going to be washed out or how big the ruts are going to be, but we made it just fine, and it was really cute because Jeremy's son started driving, and so it was fun. He had 4 backseat drivers telling him how to drive on these back roads, but we were having fun and laughing and just being in community, and it's like those moments of where you're just all laughing and having a good time, even though we're like on the side of this giant cliff driving in this brand new truck up in the woods, up in the mountains.
I love that.
Yeah, I think for me the scariest part of that was the letting my son drive, who was just learning to drive and navigate the narrow roads with the deep ruts. But
well, he's got his res license now.
Yeah, he had his res license, and yeah, he had plenty of backseat drivers helping him do that. But yeah, that was a good time.
It's so interesting too, right? Like which experiences you think are going to be the ones that like have the biggest impact on you, and which ones actually are the ones that like stick in your mind for so long.
Yeah, and I really like just what you said about that sort of risk taking and opening yourself to that opportunity. I mean, because as you're describing it, I think that there's a lot of legitimate fears and worries that you have just because of who you are and your background in the space that you're stepping into, and that willingness to go into those spaces despite that is pretty amazing. And it makes me think, kind of going back to Leah's comment about higher education in those spaces and our particular experience, and just thinking of what I always think about is the way that this particular institution sort of positioned itself as being this very progressive institution that was very focused on social justice, on community, all the buzzwords, and I didn't really see it actually living into what it said it was and what it was really about, and really being accountable in any way to communities in a meaningful way. And so I think about just the contrast with your example of putting yourself, possibly even, putting yourself in a potentially dangerous situation, for the sake of wanting to be in community, wanting to learn and grow yourself, and I hear it in a lot of what you're talking about is having a real accountability to community, by putting yourself out there in different spaces, by a lot of the really like tangible. I really appreciate the way that you're really pointing to like really tangible steps and methods and protocols that you're following in order to sort of, be accountable, sort of have this ethic and responsibility to community that I think is really powerful. And obviously, I think about it in the context of the times we're living in. I think that that's really crucial, that we're willing to sort of cross into different spaces, that we are willing to hold ourselves accountable to community and really build that allyship and solidarity on that sort of grassroots ground level, which, from my perspective is what, well, one, I think it's what we need going forward in the face of, increased, repression, rollback on sort of basic civil rights. But I think too, like it's the way that, whether you're talking about, the LGBT, Q community, whether you're talking about indigenous communities, whether you're talking about, any group that's been oppressed for any amount of time, that's really how we've survived and gotten through. And so in a lot of ways, it's sort of old hat, right? It's strategies that have been handed down for generations that were really, that I see really taking up, right, for the sake of survival and for the sake of pushing back against, harmful, oppressive, violent systems.
I really appreciate what you're saying on so many levels because I think you're right. I think like I'm not doing anything new. I'm trying to return to, I'm on my own journey for reclaiming my heritage as a Chicana person with, mixed racial identity. I've got an Irish father and my mother is Mexican, and there is a part of my heritage is also indigenous, and figuring out how I relate to those and how I'm going to step into communities is important to me. And I think it's good too to remember that like these business practices are also just like the way that I'm trying to live my life. And like you said, they're not new. These are old practices. And so it feels really good to hear that reflected back to me. Thank you for you just being like, I see you, like taking on work that has been going on for a long time. That is old work, because that is what I'm trying to do. And it's also what, you're both being so kind, giving me praise for how like stepping into spaces and moving past fear and accountability. And I do want to point out that like it is also, I think, a reciprocity thing. I only exist here as a like brown, two-spirit business person and community member living with dignity because my entire community has decided like, yes, we will hold you up on this journey, and I try to be very clear with folks. Like, if you want this publishing house to exist, if you want this space to remain open, if you want us to be able to curate events, I need you to come through and buy a book every now and then, sign up for our Patreon, show up to the events, tell us about these cool storylines, point us towards people you think we should be working with or talking to. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do is actually kind of play catch up, like folks have been holding me up all this time. I've been publishing for 8 years now. They bought all my shit. They're buying what I'm putting out there. They are telling me they find value in the stories. And so I'm trying to kind of match that with like, okay, I'm here now. I no longer have to live in survival mode in the way that I did because people are holding me up. So what is my end of the bargain, And part of that is like, I'm going to put money back into the community, into good programs that are preserving language and stories. And I'm going to try to step into new spaces and expose myself to, the pulse of culture in and around Tacoma and Puyallup and the Puget Sound. And I want to like actually move towards not only working with diverse teams, but like increasing diversity and broadening what that means, what that word even means. So I just want to say thank you for that reflection. And I think this is what we should all be doing, right? Like when we get to a space where we are able to breathe out and relax or even just look up from the grind that this world requires of us just to exist. We look up and say, how did I get here? And look back and put our hands out, bring those young people with us, bring those folks trying to break into the industry, put the money back into community. I don't want to throw my money at Amazon. I want to put it at local businesses, support local artists. So I see a lot of it as kind of just like upholding my end of reciprocity and relationship. I want to be in good relationship with my communities. And I see y'all doing that work too. I see you all really asking yourselves, like, what does this organization do? And I hear you kind of clarifying and moving towards what you want. And I think that's really cool, that you're like really actively looking at what Red Bird Camp Collective does and deciding for yourselves. It's really easy to just kind of put ourselves on a like business roller coaster and like strap ourselves in. But I see y'all like really looking around and being like, what is it we're building here?
Yes, we do stuff like teach Jeremy's son how to drive a car on a mountain road. We do things like Jeremy lighting some invasive or noxious weeds on fire out at the community garden. Fun stuff like that.
Yeah.
Real, you're gardening, you're setting up this archive, this audio journal is going to be an archive that you can look back to and other people can look back to. And you're putting out those zines that are really cool. I just ran out of those because people want them, even though they know they can get them free. People want to support y'all because they see you doing good work.
Well, we don't want to keep you too long, Chris, but I did want to wrap up by just asking you, what are you reading right now, or what ideas are you engaging with? Or, I mean, it could be even, music or whatever else, but like, what is something right now that you're really energized by or excited by?
Okay, so I'll tell you my reading pile and I'll tell you what ideas I'm excited by. I'm really hot on bilingual content right now because I think like most cultures, most people around the world live in a place where they are engaging with more than one language and thinking about the world. A language is a lens and a window into a culture. And I think it's about time we normalize in the United States engaging with multilingual content. I think there's a lot of benefits to it. And so I'm like really obsessed with that right now. And in my own reading pile, I'm reading Latinx. I've been reading it forever. I'm reading it like 2 or 3 pages at a time. I'll have to pull up. It's by Ed Morales, and it's about Mexican Americans and the power that they hold in U.S. politics. I'm also about to start, as soon as school is over, I'm about to start the Red Scare, which I'm super pumped about. Leah handed it to me when I saw y'all last, and I'm just waiting to dig into that this winter. I'm also reading Rena Priest's We Sing the Salmon Home from Empty Bowl Press. It's a beautiful collection of poetry that all is around this central theme of salmon, but it's however the poets interpreted that, so it's very eclectic, which I like. And I just picked up a kid's book called Palestine, and it's about a little Palestinian girl whose teacher won't recognize Palestine as an official place, or and won't recognize it verbally or on a map. And so it's a kid's picture book about that little girl going back to her home and learning from her parents about Palestine and her family story. And that's on my reading list because, Leah, I'm sure you've noticed, and Jeremy, at some point your kid was small, so you probably know this too. When you read a kid's book, you read it like 100 times. So
Yes.
it's on our, we just got it this week, but we've already read it like 3 or 4 times. So I'm really leaning on it and the way that it's presenting material to kind of wrap my head around how to talk to my kid about like nation states and cultures and countries, because she's asking, you know, in her own little baby way about stuff, and like taking her back to New Mexico, which is my ancestral homeland, and then taking her up to Vancouver Island, where she has an ancestral homeland through her father's side. She has a lot of questions right now about like, what is home? Where are we from? And then I have to explain the U.S. on top of that. So I'm leaning on this book to try to figure out that conversation out, or those conversations out.
That I don't know. We might have to invite you back for round 2. That has me thinking about another conversation that could be another maybe episode of just focusing on like, how do you, as a parent, you know, the learning that happens outside of formal schooling and the ways that you
Yes.
counter narratives, and how do you have these, you know, discussions that you're talking about having, and especially when you're raising students or children who are, you know, indigenous and not on their homelands, and how do you explain that, and how do you make, you know, concrete you know, decisions and moves to make sure that they have a relationship with spaces.
Yeah, and how to teach them like loyalty, like who is she loyal to? You know, who does she hold honor to? Who does she, like? There's so many things. I want to be in that room, but put me on a couch. I want to hear people smarter than me. I need some education. You know, it's tricky to navigate, and it's just important work. I think that's like really revolutionary work. Is like, how do we teach our kids? How do we give them a different foundation? Or at least that's what I'm thinking, you know, like you're right. This is a whole other conversation because that dives so much into like culturalization and I've got a million things. My brain's going now.
Yeah, that's definitely a whole nother episode. And yeah, I've got a lot to say about that as well. And I know that Leah does. A lot of really intentional things that I've done as a parent, and also sacrifices that go into that. You know, I know for me, not to get into it now, but I'll get into it a little bit now.
Please, yeah.
You know, most of our travel time, you know, my time off, you know, the money that I have to be able to travel. You know, we're not going to Disneyland, or we're not going off on some vacation. It's really, it's to go home as often as we can. Mm-hmm. Ceremony, that's become a priority. And so round two, we'll dive deep into that. But Chris, I did want to give you an opportunity to just say, you know, what is the best way to support Blue Cactus? How can people, and I know that you're also an author, so what's the best way to find your work, the best way to support Blue Cactus, and how can people find you?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that opportunity. I think that the best way for folks to support us, I'll start with the version that does not require cash. Please request books from Blue Cactus Press at your local library. That is a huge one for us. It doesn't require any money. You utilize and support a public service at the same time, and libraries in turn will support us and get our books into their system. So that's a really great way to support the press. If you're fortunate enough to have some pocket cash, I urge you buy a book every now and then. And if you have more means, or you want to support on a a broader level, I encourage folks to head to our Patreon page where they can sign up to get our books as we make them. If you are interested in my own poetry work, which is a lot about parenting and a lot about the Chicana mixed experience, you can find my poetry at bluecactuspress.com. Or honestly, come find me around town because I'm about to drop a book that you cannot get online. You have to get it hand to hand. So that's really exciting. And I think just, engage with the folks that we're working with too. Anytime if somebody wants to support us, they don't just have to engage with Blue Cactus Press. Go find our authors, tell them you love their work. Go talk to them about their crazy ideas. Tell me about your friends with crazy ideas so I can go check it out and spread the word. There's a million ways to support. I think just engage with us.
Thank you so much, Chris. So check out Blue Cactus online at bluecactuspress.com. You can check out all the amazing books there. I highly recommend Moss Covered Claws. I just finished reading that one. It's the perfect time to pick that up right now because it's spooky, but so they pull you back. The author pulls you back after all the spookiness. And then of course Blue Cactus is on Patreon. And you can subscribe there for even more amazing content. And Blue Cactus is also on Instagram. So thank you so much for your time today, Chris. I had a great time visiting with you and look forward to visiting again in the future.
Thanks. Y'all are the best. Thank you for just being in community and for having me on. And I can't wait to see what you get up to in the next year.
Okay, Jeremy, turn off the recording.